Hey, it's Adam with the Backpack Theory podcast, where we unpack past experiences to help define a better future. And today, we are going to be unpacking through the darkness. That is such an ominous statement whenever you think about it. But truly, I think all of us at some point in our life have hit a really dark point. And my guest today, Ty Hamilton, he is a local Oklahoma City entrepreneur that is deeply invested in the Oklahoma City marketplace and the community. His current passion is cultivating a balance between career and spiritual growth. Ty is a fellow father of some young kiddos and just such a pleasure to have him on. Welcome to the podcast, Ty.
Cheers to that, my friend. Girl dad all the way.
Dude, girl dad all the way. It's crazy. Whenever people talk about having a daughter, and like they tell you, they're like, dude, like it will change you. Like it will change your perception. I had no idea the amount of love that I could have for another human being. It is a love that truly is completely unexplainable. Did you have that same experience whenever you ended up having a daughter?
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak on being a father of girls, but yeah, it's almost impossible not to have a change in your perspective of life when you have those little girls in your arms. For me, it's kind of allowed me to sit into the present moment a little bit easier than it was in the past.
Oh, absolutely, dude. Like it's great. Like just putting them to bed. Like I sing her. Have you ever heard Paul Simon, Father and Daughter? All right. Well, if you want to cry after you get done with the podcast, go listen to that song. That is my crying song. But no, dude, I've listened to that. So I sing the last verse of that and the chorus to my daughter every night before I put her down, and then also pray with her every night before she goes to sleep. And it's just, dude, there's something about that routine and like just that connection with a daughter. I mean, a child in general, but I think as a man, like really just cherishing this beautiful little child that was like given to us is just such an awesome experience.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't have that same exact routine. We have our owns for sure. Right now, my little girls are actively getting into my spiritual journey. So it's really fun to see my oldest, who just turned 5. She'll sit in my lap and meditate with me. It's just really fun to work with her and see that curiosity that just doesn't seem like it has any limits to it. And that's my goal as a father, is to continue to help that proliferate.
Dude, I love the word curiosity. That was my word for this year, actually. And like, I think regardless of what religion or whatever you look at, if you look at all the different spiritual leaders across like time, like curiosity is such a common theme that they encourage, like that curiosity of a child, like just being curious, never like setting prejudgments, like always wanting to learn and like yearning for that genuine connection. Like, I think that's why, like, so many spiritual leaders talk about wanting to have that mindset of a child because, like, truly, as we grow up and become adults, we can get really set in our ways and we can really get these preconceived notions and we can really buy into, "No, that is definitely the way it is." And some of us just kind of lose our curiosity or on the way, right?
Absolutely. I've got whole notes and journals written about this on how an adult can get back to that place and that childhood type of curiosity. And I don't know, it's working for me. So I'm enjoying the moments.
Dude, that's so cool. So, Ty, tell us a little bit about, real quick. Let's plug in your businesses because you are an entrepreneur. Tell us a little about what you're doing in the Oklahoma City community in relation to business.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm opening with my partners a company called Bungalow 23. It's pretty comprehensive concept. It has 10 overall businesses included in one concept. It will have all different names. They have separate entities in themselves. But what's really fun is we're trying to cultivate a place for our community to go have fun, go hang out. The big thing about Oklahoma that is still is a struggle is when I have my friends come in from out of state, it's always the same concern. Man, you guys are growing, you're doing great things, but I hate it that when I'm at this place, I got to then go get an Uber and go 2 miles this way, 5 miles this way, 10 miles that way. Our goal is to eliminate that completely with this concept. Is go one place, hang out for as long as you want, and then you can head home. But ultimately, the goal is to be as inclusive for the entire community and really show the melting pot of the diversity that Oklahoma really has to offer.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I was fortunate enough. I helped consult a company that did one of the floors in your concept, and it's super cool. And as we were talking, I know that like local star Adam Aguilar, is it Aguilar, right?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know he's doing a show tonight. I might actually pop down after the podcast and kind of check that out. But I love what y'all have. I actually know your business partner. It's funny because him and I actually we go kind of way back, and like it's hilarious because I remember even it's funny how God does weird stuff, right? So I specifically remember, and I haven't even told you this yet. I saved it for the podcast. I remember sitting in the sauna with Trong, and we're sitting there and we're talking about going through some darkness in our life. And we're talking about like different circumstances we're in, and we're talking about just the struggle as men that we run into sometimes and how it's really hard to find other men to talk about those things with. And he specifically mentioned his business partner who had been on this spiritual journey at some point and was really encouraging him to start looking at the spiritual side of things to kind of run through that darkness. And I think it's so cool whenever it came to coming on this podcast, the fact that you really, we unpacked your story a little bit on the pre-interview yesterday, but you really, I love the fact that you're like trying to figure out that difference between career and spiritual growth. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about like what are some things that you're currently working on in your life to where you really feel like you're leaning into that spiritual growth side and career balance?
Yeah, I'm going to overspeak just a little bit, which is very typical for me anyway. So I feel very comfortable in this area. A couple other business partners would probably be freaking out right now. But with that, I actually found myself struggling a little bit in the midst of creating this concept. This is the heartbeat of Trung, and us business partners are there to help facilitate this to basically come to fruition. And I was kind of struggling with where I was at, and we're creating these bars. How does it make sense for my spiritual journey to be aligned with this? And what I recognized through deep meditations is that I was only viewing one side of this concept, the shadow side, if you will. And now I view our company almost like a coin. Going to be two sides to the coin. And when I focused on all of these things, like people are going to get complicated, and going to be, I'm basically creating this place where possibly people could get in fights, and I found myself really putting a lot of fixation on the negative side.
Mm,
And through this meditation, it actually provided me with much more clarity that I really needed to move forward for this project to be successful in my own eyes and something I can be passionate about. And that was the light of the coin, the light side that was shining so bright, by the way. And that is, we are cultivating a space for our community to come hang out, even with their children. Eventually, we're going to have this open garden in the middle area, and this is a place where you can bring your dogs. People are going to make new connections there. There will be
mm,
first kisses that happen there. There will be entire families that are created from the first moment that they met over at our concept. And when I started to see all of the positivity that this could bring, not only for myself, but for our community, I realized I was focusing on the negative, which continues to be a repeating lesson through my spiritual journey of there's more to what I initially see. And if I'm willing to be curious and find the other side of what that message is, I find that we are very complex beings and our businesses are very complex as well. And when I give grace for that, I recognize that this is right up my alley because I'm not a man that just comes from the light. I very much have the darkness. And I think having that duality, the polarity between the two is necessary to actually understand how amazing this concept really is going to be. You can use it and abuse it, or you can use this to really help change the trajectory of your life. So moving forward, I'm actually going to be putting a lot of emphasis on in our morning sessions. We're going to have yoga classes, cold plunges, guided meditations, breath work, you name it. So this is a space literally for everybody, no matter what part of your journey that you're in.
yeah, I think that's so cool. I mean, I look at, whenever it comes to your journey, dude, it's really easy to get caught up. I don't care what industry you're in. I don't care if you're in the oil and gas industry. I don't care if you're in the bar industry. I don't care if you're in the freaking street sweeping business. There's always the potential for you to look at it from a negative light. Like there just is. And I think the more that we look at our current situation and try to find purpose and try to figure out in the situation we're at. I think there's a famous quote that I love, and it's if you're going to be a street sweeper, be the best street sweeper that you can be. Be the street sweeper that is compared to Michelangelo and the 16 Chaplain, like be the greatest you can be. And when you die, all the hosts of heaven look down and say, there lived the greatest street sweeper ever. And so many people, they look at like, what's my purpose in life? Like, where exactly am I at? And it's really easy to get and fall down these dark holes and loss of purpose in your life. And I think that if you truly look at where you're at from that lens of curiosity, look at what path you're on, and you choose to look for the positive and you choose to use your influence to do positive things within the space that you have been given, you can really start making a difference. There's a health clinic. It's a men's health clinic. It's called Eros Men's Health Clinic. And I had a meeting with them yesterday. And the concept that these guys have is we don't just want to like provide good health for men. Like we want to facilitate an environment to where men feel comfortable to talk about their feelings. They feel comfortable to actually talk about the hardships they're going through. They can actually come in here and we're actually going to look at different ways from a holistic standpoint or functional medicine standpoint to actually start healing them. And I think that hearing your story yesterday ties in so great to that because we all in life have these moments, right? Like we all have these moments where we realize that we got to wake up. We got to do something different. And Ty, why don't you tell us a little bit? I know that, which we're going to save a little bit of, that you made a journey literally to Peru, but why don't you tell us a little bit about the moment whenever you realized in life that you needed to make a change out of the darkness?
Sure. I think life is more simple than we give it credit for, to be honest. I view it now in a way almost like a pendulum, and it's going to go from one extreme to the next. But if you have the faith that even in the darkest moments, that pendulum may swing as far as it possibly can, that eventually it will go the other direction. And that was very much the case for myself. I found myself in a extremely dark place in my life. And that kind of started early on in my childhood, that manifested as I became an adult. And it probably took me years of that journey to sit back, zoom out for a moment and look at the full picture and gambit of how my life's trajectory led me to that moment. And that was just that pendulum that was literally just slowly going up. And then when it maxed out there in my probably early 20s, I knew that something had to change. And ultimately, if I wasn't willing to find the strength to make that decision.
Yeah, I think I've had quite a few interviews on here, and it's remarkable how stories are so different, but have so many commonalities leading up to that moment, and how you can just get so confused, you can get so lost. In the world we live in today, there is so much darkness, and there's so much pressure, and there's so much out there that tells you you're never going to be enough. You're never going to add up. You're never going to succeed. Like you always need a little bit more security. And it's really easy to get caught in a really dark place. And I know that you were in a really dark place. And how old were you? And how long ago was it that you took your trip to Peru?
That was last year. So 34 is how old I was. And I'm no stranger to alignments of your path intersecting with the universe's intentions. So I no longer use the word coincidence any longer. But the moment that my life changed and I knew that I needed to take more control of my spiritual journey, I was actually 33 years old, which is quite biblical, as we all know. So the massive change happened at 33 and then eventually Peru at 34. And here I am at 35. much, much brighter person than I was just a couple years ago.
So you looked into going to Peru, and why don't you tell the people that are listening to this a little bit? Because we've like alluded to this. Like, what exactly, where were you at whenever you started searching for this Peru? Why don't you tell them what exactly your journey was in Peru?
Yeah. So I'm somebody that's never done any type of psychedelic. I've had, my fair share of alcoholic drinks, being 21 and up, and had my fun party days. But when it came to really anything else, I hadn't done anything. And so the idea of ayahuasca and Peru was quite extreme. And I came across that term ayahuasca, never heard of that in my entire life until I heard it on a podcast. And
Hmm.
it was a person that had a very similar story of mine. And I felt like I just could not gain any more ground in my journey. And I felt stuck. I felt like there was just no room for growth any longer. And then I saw how this person changed before my eyes. And he just, it was amazing. He video recorded it. He showed his experience. And that in itself was like, wow, if that can do that for him, if I can get 10% of the smile that he has on his face right now, it was worth it in the end. And that's kind of what sparked my curiosity, which will probably be the word of the podcast. And that was, it's time for me to make this decision. I've kind of been a bystander in my own life for far too long. And now I want to be a part of this story that my life is unfolding. I made the decision and I signed up immediately for that trip to Peru for that experience. And I set it out a year and a half out in advance, realizing I had no background in any of this. And so for that next year and a half, I was extremely intentional with my journey. And that was learning all types of different modalities, learning ways of handling my own stress, my own anxieties. And when I finally got to a place where I was calm for the first time in a decade, I knew that I had arrived and it was time for me to make that next step into the unknown.
Dude, that's so cool. Yeah, I think a couple things you said. Number one, like just finding peace. Like, it's really easy whenever you've gone through a lot of hardships in your life for chaos to be your normal. And being very intentional leading up to that trip, I think that's awesome. Was it hard planning it out that far ahead of time? And like, what was the time like? I mean, between when you first recognized I'm at a point in my life where I don't feel like I'm growing, but I know there's something I need to do. Like, what was that year like building up to that trip? Because that's a long pause.
Yeah. To be honest, the main factor would have been fear. I've got two little girls and a wife at home, and not knowing much about this word or medicine or drug, psychedelic, I knew I wanted to take my time. I had already gotten to this place at 33 years old. And with all of that time, I'd not made much difference in my own life when it came to spirituality. And when I looked at the actual amount of minutes I probably put into that, it was very few, far in between. And this was a way that I could finally put my step forward in the direction that I wanted to go. And I felt pulled to. And so when it typically was a Sunday, every once in a while, I would go and to church and have maybe a good experience, maybe not so good experience. This was a time that I could utilize the other 6 days all the way up for that entire year. So really for me, it was to help build confidence within myself. But also I knew that there was so much more healing that needed to take place before I went there. I wasn't just going to put my problems onto this jungle or on this medicine and just, oh, fix it all. I knew that there was work that I could do myself. And that's the reason why I pushed it out as far as I did.
Yeah. Speaking of which, that's a pretty radical jump. I have a buddy of mine that actually we were talking about. He used to live in Dallas, knew a bunch of pharmaceutical guys back whenever that was like you were in pharmaceuticals and you would go make these deals and make literally millions of dollars a month sometimes if you were a sales rep. Like it was absolutely insane. And these guys ended up making so much money, became so miserable, became addicted to everything that you can think of, but had all the money in the world and they were miserable. And they ended up going on this 4-month retreat. I don't know if it was Peru, it was somewhere in Asia. And they ended up coming back completely different human beings. But in order for you to reach that point, Ty, why don't we back up a little bit and let's talk about your childhood. Let's talk about growing up. Let's talk about how does a guy like yourself that is doing these amazing things in life get to a point where he feels like he needs to go on a trip to Peru to leave his family, his children, to really discover another side of spirituality. What was growing up like? Was it pretty normal?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, if you were to look at it from a zoomed out perspective, I think most people would say I had a pretty normal childhood. There's, we all have our little, things that happen within the walls of the home that maybe aren't so normal. But I grew up as a Catholic and, that was chosen for me. I, was born into the family of Catholics and that was going to be the direction I went as well. And I just knew that my relationship with God just meant that I need to follow these rules and I got to do this way, this, that way. And if I did all of that, then that would be the way I get my golden ticket to the golden gates.
Mm,
However, I just never felt this connection. And I knew there was probably something out there because I saw this connection within my own mother. I'm like, I see how, excited you are every Sunday that we go to church. I see how passionate you are. And you try to speak passion into your own children. It just, for me, it kind of always landed on deaf ears. It was a book that was being taught to us. And I viewed it just as such, is that it's just the book and I knew that I just needed to be nice to people. And when I did that, it just kind of led me down a path of, okay, I guess this is it. And I guess I'm good enough. But then I realized as I got older that there was a lot that I could have learned throughout that entire process of being a child, turning into an adult. And that was my lack of coping skills that I had for this world. Didn't know at the time. We all think everyone lives the same life as we do because that's the only life we know. And, we had a lot of anger in our household growing up, a lot of anger. And that was a method in which I put that on my tool belt. I had anger locked down. I was great at anger. But it's funny, I can reflect on it now more. If you would have asked me literally a year and a half ago, I will tell you, I remember nothing of my childhood. Nothing. The furthest back I could go is probably 14 or 15 years old. I thought this was what everyone experienced too. But I would speak with my wife and she would talk about when she was 3 or 4 years old. And that was always confusing for me. And as I kind of went down my spiritual journey, I realized I blocked out a lot of moments because of the coping skills I needed as a child to make it through some very extreme moments, moments of anger, moments of lashing out. And so I kind of really just went to this weird meditative state that made me numb to the world. And I had anger and I had numbness. And those are pretty much the only skill sets I had going into my early 20s.
wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Thank you for being intentional. I mean, I grew up very similarly as you, which we kind of discussed off camera. I was raised in the Baptist church. My faith was my parents' faith. I was basically born into it. I love my parents. They're great people, but like growing up, there's a lot of things. I learned the shame based gospel, which I was like, well, I got to be perfect. And if I'm not perfect, then I'm not doing it right. And that for me, I did not deal with the anger issue as much, but I became a compulsive liar because I knew that there was no way for me to be perfect. And so therefore, like I just lied about stuff. And it's funny you talk about whenever like you don't remember that area when you were younger. I for a long time didn't remember a lot of those things because I was constantly in shame. I was constantly in fear. And for me, the way that I took it out, which everybody's got their different ways, depending on what coping mechanism, as you say, you end up working through. Mine was just lying about stuff and making myself feel better, making myself feel more, making myself like I was living more purposeful because I was just lost. There was a hole in my soul. I had no personal relationship with a higher power. I just knew that if I didn't do things the right way, I was going to hell. And that doesn't work whenever you get older. And so you go into your 20s, Ty. And what ends up happening? I know you said you went to college, you went to study. Like, what was that experience like?
Yeah. I was very blessed to be a good student that was motivated by sports. It was one of those things that if you don't have straight A's, then you don't get to play for the team. And so that was my motivator. And then that led me to college, which I had to make the decision. Am I going to play sports? Or am I going to put more focus on my curriculum? And I chose the curriculum over sports. My mother is a physical therapist, so I figured, well, I like helping people. Maybe this is an avenue for me. And so I
Mm,
began that journey to become a physical therapist. I got sidetracked. Eventually, my now wife, my father-in-law, he is a firefighter, and I really enjoyed the stories he would tell me at work. And I was like, man, this kind of feels like a sports team. So I decided I want to be a firefighter. And that kind of led me down this path of becoming a paramedic. And then basically just didn't work out. They went on hiring freeze. So I went back to my original plan and went back to therapy school and became a therapist. This is all like a time that, man, I really should be the happiest I've ever been. You know, I finally made it. I finally did all of the work. I did all of the studies. I passed the test. This is like a hallelujah. Like he did. It. But man, I've never felt so empty in my entire life. It was actually one of the scarier moments when you get into that place of, graduation. And now I have to go find a job and I'm in between state right now. I haven't taken my boards yet. So where do I fit? And that basically allowed me to be a little bit sedentary and have way too much time on my hands for the thoughts that were running through my head. And it took me into a place that I could have never imagined the amount of darkness that I found myself in. And again, I should be so happy. Yet I started to feel this almost evil come over me. And it felt like I was just shackled down and there's nothing I can do to get rid of it.
and wow. Yeah, dude, I think there's so many people, especially you look at today's society, that they do all the things they think they're supposed to. They follow in their parents' footsteps. They're like, well, I'm doing the right thing, but they can't find purpose. They did everything the world told them to do, but like they're not they're doing the preset things that they think they're supposed to do without really looking inward and figuring out what their purpose is. And finding a purpose driven life, something that can actually drive you, is something that so many people don't pursue because you can't tie a dollar sign to it. There's no way to tie security to your purpose. Most people that find their true purpose have to lose all sense of security during the process. And so you go through that. Will you tell us a short summary about the tornado story whenever you had your first kind of mini trauma happen to you? If you can just summarize that in like 3 minutes, that would be awesome.
Yeah. I think these traumas happen in our life in the most unexpected times. This is the time again, I should be so happy. My wife and I have just bought our first house and everything from outside looking in. We were extremely successful. We're doing exactly what we said we were going to do. And we're working on a project in the garage, and then those tornado sirens go off. And as an Oklahoman, as I'm sure you very much are aware, we're used to sirens. So
Let's go
that
watch the
was
tornado.
exactly, it was nothing. And then so we just continue working on the project. My wife pulls up her phone. She's looking at the radar. She goes, oh, I think this is kind of a big deal. We should look at maybe getting some safety. And I said, oh, it's going to be fine. So I go into the backyard and I got a burrito in one hand, a beer in the other. And I look up from my patio and I see this mile wide tornado heading directly towards us. To say that was a surreal moment would not be giving it enough value. My wife's screaming at me. I'm telling her, listen, I'm going to be there shortly. We're going to figure this out. As soon as it obliterates this house at the end of my neighborhood, I'll come inside and then we'll get underneath this desk. So right before it gets to that house, we're probably 100 yards away. This massive gust of wind comes in, almost blows me over. And this tornado makes a 90-degree turn and completely misses our neighborhood and goes directly towards another town. And that town was Moore. And that was a tough day for a lot of Oklahomans. And I can't even imagine what some of these families are still going through. But that tornado ended up hitting an elementary school and it claimed a lot of lives of children. And, I'm sitting there dealing with so much of this awful news on the TV. And then they start to describe the details of how these children die. And I'm just sitting like, why are we even sharing these details? I don't see how this is anything that should be told to the world, and is more so just like to get more views, to get more attention. And I held on to that information and I tried my best to go to sleep. And when I went and finally got my head to lay down and my eyes to close, I pass out. And that was the most intense dream I've ever experienced. I found myself in a body of one of these children in the elementary school. And as the school comes down and lands on us, looking at all of my classmates, and we're screaming and crying and so full of fear. And then the rain continues to come in and the waters begin to rise. And then I watch my classmates drown in front of me. And it was a type of pain I've never experienced in my life.
Mm.
And I wake up from that nightmare visibly shaken, like I'm convulsing. And I just get out of the bed and I go grab my phone. I do, what all of us millennials do. I'm Googling things like, what happens when we die? I need to have an answer. And I start Googling. And that was one of the worst things I probably could have done, because the answer I received was nothing. Nothing happens.
Yeah, and that's so traumatic. It's remarkable to me how your brain. I have a dream journal, so I write out dreams that end up coming to my head. It's crazy whenever you have one of those really vivid dreams, and also the thought process behind you already, whenever you were younger, you were searching for, is there a God? What happens after life? And then you have this tornado coming directly towards you. It ends up missing you. It's almost a sigh of relief. And then you turn on the news and all these freaking children die. And then you got to start questioning yourself, why them? Why not me, God? Like, why would that happen? And then that conveys into this dream that turns into paralysis. And I mean, that in itself is very traumatizing whenever you don't have a higher spiritual connection, because that can really lead you down a dark path of, again, like, why them? Why did they have to die? Why didn't I die? The tornado's headed right. Why did it take a turn? Like, why not? And then you can almost like ingest like this guilt and everything into this very like micro trauma. And then you told me the story, the follow-up of that, to where you ended up working at well, why don't you tell us about the part leading up to the hospital story, and what ended up happening in an interaction between those times?
Sure. So this time frame of this tornado is right when I graduated and I'm in between boards. So I'm in that place of, I got nothing to do. And my mind just continues to ruminate on this awful nightmare. And finally, there was a times of my day where I would spend 3-4 hours in the shower, just weeping like an infant.
Mm.
And my wife would come in there and hold on to me. And this went on for weeks. And finally I get the call that I've been offered a job. And I go to this hospital I've worked at and, done clinicals in the past. And so I go and I start working in this hospital, feeling better only because I'm distracting my thoughts. And after a few weeks, I come across this gentleman working with him in the ICU. And I sit him on the edge of the bed. We're doing our exercises and he looks at me and he says, Ty, I got something to tell you. I say, okay, yeah. What's going on? He goes, I want to let you know that I died. And I said, I used my my medical background brain. And yeah, I saw that in your chart. I saw your heart went to asystole and, it's amazing that you made a recovery the way you did. Like you're here in front of me. Like, I'm just so proud of you. He's like, you're not listening. I died. And in that moment, I realized this man wants to tell me something. So I stepped back and, okay, have your space. Tell me what you need to tell me. And then he goes on to describe the moments that took place when his heart stopped for 5 to 6 minutes. He said, I felt myself come out of my body and I couldn't tell really who was in this bed. I was actually kind of confused, but it was very calming. No fear, no pain, nothing. Then I saw all of these nurses running into my room and one of the nurses jumped on my bed and, literally straddled me around my chest and started doing compressions. And I'm sitting there like, there's no way this guy would know this without any medical background. That's the technique that we use in the hospital. I'm like, okay, okay. And so I'm a little bit more confused. And he's like, and I saw the doctor come in and brought all these medications and they were pushing these medications, shocking my body. And I was just watching. And that's when I realized it was me. I saw the side of my face and I recognized that. And I came to the conclusion, like, oh my God, I just died.
Mm.
And I just continued to float over this entire thing happening, not getting to witness how it ended, but I kept floating up through the ceiling of the hospital into the sky. And my grandfather was waiting for me in the clouds. He died like
Mm.
6 or 7 years ago. And I'm just sitting like, wow, this is a story. Because he put his hands out and he said, son, I'm just so happy to see you. I got so much to show you. My grandfather takes me by the hand and we just start going through these clouds and he's telling me these stories of heaven and what it's like and this unconditional love that you just never could understand until you've been there. And then he takes me to this place where I see this river that goes as far as the eye can see, both from the left and the right. He takes me down to the bank and we sit down on one side of the river and he goes, I want you to look up. So I look up and I see all my family and friends on the other side of the river. And they're weeping, they're mourning the loss of me. They're so sad. Their tears just flowing down their face. And even with that knowledge, I looked at my grandfather. I was like, man, I'm just so happy to be here. And I don't want to go back there. This is amazing. I want to keep this feeling. And my grandfather grabbed me by the hand and he said, I know this doesn't make sense, but the message I've been told to tell you is that you have a greater purpose and you haven't served it yet. And that is you have to go back to earth. And that purpose is to go save someone's life. And in that moment, that man, he looks at me and he says, Ty, I don't know who you are. And I don't know what you're going through, but I know that you are the one I'm supposed to save his life. I'm supposed to tell you that it's going to be okay, that I've been there myself. And there's nothing to be worried about. There's nothing to have fear about.
Mm.
It's going to be okay. He puts his arms out and I hugged basically this stranger and we embraced and tears flowing down our faces. And in that moment, it was the first time I felt like maybe there's something to this. Maybe there's something more that happens when we die.
It's such a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that with us. It's remarkable whenever your higher power, God, whenever you have an interaction like that in your life and you get this message through doing these interviews. I have heard some unbelievable stories when people get these messages and it doesn't make sense. And you get these throughout your life. It's not necessarily the turnaround, but it's just a little token. It's a little token along the journey that you can always go back. And whenever you really make that turn into that purpose driven life, you can look back and really resonate on those moments and realize that it was God literally speaking through someone else to you. And that's just such a beautiful message and beautiful story. So I know from our discussion that that was a big sigh of relief, but you still ended up going down a journey where there was still a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I can only speak for myself, but I consider myself to probably be the most stubborn dude that maybe has ever walked this earth. Given
It's a
that,
good label.
given that miracle of a story, I still continue to find doubt weaving in and out of this man's story that he was telling to me. And I'm starting to use my scientific brain of, oh, this is, the chemicals that were surging through his brain in that moment. And, and that was probably more of just a radical dream right before he was about to die. And so I make this decision, and maybe there's not as much weight to this than I felt in that exact moment. This is weeks later and I find myself questioning everything. And it just got to a place where I was stopped basically looking for answers. I felt like I had the answer. The answer was that still nothing happens when we die. And then you come to a place where if you get to a spot where you don't believe in anything, for my personal experience, that was the most terrifying place I'd ever been in my entire life.
Mm.
And I recall my father showing up, and he was picking up, some piece of equipment at my house. And he asked a very simple question that a lot of fathers do. He's like, "Hey, how's it going?" And that question was so profound to me. I was like, "Man, Dad, I'm not good. All I think about is death. All I think about is when you're going to die, and when my siblings are going to die, and when my mom's going to die, and when my uncle's going to die." It's like, can't stop thinking about it. And, Dad, thrown off by the response, he was looking for like, "Hey, everything's good. I'm going to go watch the game later tonight." He responded in a way like, "Listen, I don't know what's going on in your life, but please know that I'm here for you anytime you need it. If you ever need someone to talk to, pick up the phone, call me. I'll be here in a moment's instance." "Thanks, Dad." Is like, "Honestly, I'm fine. I don't know what's going on. I just probably need to get some rest." And he goes, "Okay, well, again, call me if you need anything." And then he leaves. 30 minutes later, my little brother shows up. He's 2 years younger than me. So probably about 22, I'm 24. And he shows up on his motorcycle, and he's like, "Hey man, I got this new journey that I've been on, man. I've been trying to find these new routes to take the motorcycles on, and it's kind of out in the country. I think it'd just be nice to get some fresh air. But there's this really cool hamburger joint that I want to take you to." And I look at him, "Matthew, come on, bro. I know Dad called you." He's
Mm.
like, "No, it's nothing like that. It's like, let's just get out of the house, and I want to take you to this burger joint." All right, whatever. Anything to get out of my own head. Get on my motorcycle and we head down the highway, and we're secluded. We're the only ones on this backcountry road on this highway. And and then this darkness started to invade my mind again in the middle of this ride. And this was a darkness I've never felt before. This one was potent. This one was, I don't know how to describe it other than I had lost all hope, nothing left. And this overwhelming amount of pain started to take over from the inside out until I literally felt pain all over my entire body. And I recognized I don't want to do this anymore. And so I let my brother drive a little bit further out, 14, 15 car lengths ahead of me. And then I see the semi that's going to be heading our direction. And so we're coming up on a hill, and I don't want to live this life in the way that I have any longer. So I make the decision to pull my motorcycle over into oncoming traffic. And as I'm coming up, I'm on one side of the hill, the semi's on the other. I am screaming at myself in my helmet, like, "You can't do this. I don't know what's going on, but you can't do this. You have to stop. You got to get over." I'm like, "No, I don't want to do this anymore. Don't." And the last thing, right before we get to the top of this hill, this voice comes in and says, "You can't do this in front of your brother." And I pull my motorcycle over into the other lane. The semi passes me. He has no idea what about just happened. And we finally get to this burger joint. I'm visibly shaking again, and my whole body's shaky. My brother's like, "Man, are you okay?" "I don't know what's going on, Matthew, but I just got to get home, dude. I'm not good. I got to get home." And so we make it home, and he heads back, and I immediately talk to my wife. And I just almost killed myself today. And she breaks down in tears, and she calls my mother. My mom immediately gets there as fast as possible. her own sister, she lost a son herself, and she saw the type of anguish and pain that comes along with that. And she was damned if she was going to live that same life. And she tried to use the scientific method with me, like, hey, we're going to get you checked in the hospital, get your chemicals all back where they need to be. And I'm like, Mom, I'm not crazy. I don't know what happens when I die, and you can't tell me either. And that's when my wife grabs me by the hand. She's, I don't care what you have to say, but we're going to go to church. And at that point, I basically just said, I got nothing else. I might as well give it a shot. And so I go and we go to church, and, we have those moments where every once in a while, someone said they go to church and it feels like the pastor's talking right at them. Same thing. Talking right at me. Oh man, this is something. I feel something. This is good. This is good. And then I found myself going to that place of darkness again. Again, like I said, the most stubborn dude in the world. And 3-4 weeks go by and nothing's happening. It's missing me. And their moment of worship. And I close my eyes in this amount of immense pain. And I prayed the most audacious prayer of my entire life. And that was, God, if you're real, show me now. Because if you're not, I'm going to go home and shoot myself in the head. And I prayed it over and over again. And just when nothing was happening, right before I opened my eyes, this gentleman in the congregation I never met in my life comes up right behind me and just puts me in this mass bear hug. And I'm like, how could you know? How could you know that I'm feeling this right now? And I collapsed into his arms and, just overwhelmed and just saying, thank you. Thank you so much. And when I finally get my composure, I opened my eyes to thank that man. And when I turned around, there was nobody there. And I realized in that moment, you can actually have a personal relationship with our Creator. And for that brief moment, I got to see what it felt like to feel his love while I was still here on this earth. And from that moment on, it was a place where I at least had a little glimmer of hope again. And that hope I held on to for the rest of my journey that led me to Peru eventually.
Shit, that's awesome. And that's such a powerful story. And it's so impactful hearing, again, those like divine interactions that are, you can't really, in a human mindset, rationalize them. We got about 15 minutes left. And I don't want to skip over this part of the story, but I know that during this process between here and Peru that you ended up losing your brother in an accident. And, just briefly, if you just want to share a little bit about that story and experience with us in a couple minutes.
So about 6 months after that experience happened in the church, my brother and I would go on our yearly snowboard trips in New Mexico. We had one of the most amazing experiences that we've ever had. It was the first time we've ever not gone at each other's throats. And we can't wait to get back home and tell everybody about like, we found finally the best spot to go to. I mean, all the best routes. This is the place to go. And on the way back home, this person flashes their headlights at us. And I look at my brother. I'm like, what's going on? We're middle of the day. I don't have my headlights on. And then I realized, it's probably a cop up here. I need to sit down a bit. So I'm probably going 4 or 5 miles over the speed limit. So I bring it back down to the exact speed limit. And there's no cop. And I'm confused and I don't know what the hell was that about? And we come over this hill, and that was when I saw these animals that were walking across the road. And my knee-jerk reaction, I hit the brakes. The car doesn't respond like it had in the past or normally when I've been in an instance where you slam on your brakes in an emergency. The car lost control, and we end up flipping about 7 times. And I remember, vividly, there's 4 of us, me, 2 friends, my brother, and I'm look at my friend right next to me in shotgun. I'm like, you okay? And he's like, oh, I'm okay. I'm okay. And I scream for my brother, Matthew, are you okay? And nothing but silence. And then I turn around and look in the back seat, and there's nobody else in the car. And the car, the door's so jammed, crushed, I can't get out of it. I climb out of the sunroof, and that's when I find my little brother. And I go right into paramedic mode, and I start doing compressions, and I end up doing CPR on him for 3 hours until we finally find a man to pull over and come help us. And at that point, it was far too late. And I knew the only thing I could do at that moment was just to hold him and embrace him until our Lord embraced him. That type of pain. And I wish on nobody in the pain to call your own father, to tell him what happened, is something I never wanted to relive ever again. And consequently, what led me on my spiritual journey was that I ended up running into that same memory again. I was dealing with flashbacks all the time, but I had this dream where it was so vivid that I relived my brother's death over 1,000 times over an 8-hour period. And when I
Mm.
woke up from that dream, I knew something had to change. And I had not healed from this moment. This was 6 years after his death. I could not get past it. I thought I was able to function as an adult again. I thought I'd made it. And then I realized how broken it still was. And that's when I had to make change. And that's when I started my journey in researching of what alternative methods were out there that potentially could help me.
Well, and it's crazy because you've struggled with your whole life, wondering what the afterlife is like, and then you go through that traumatic experience with your brother, and you're wondering, where did he go? Did he go somewhere? And that lands you in a place where, here you are 6 years later, but you start looking for answers and you start looking for ways to heal. And that takes a lot of courage. A lot of people get stuck in these traumatic experiences and go over and over again. So it's amazing that God led you down this path to where finally, after all the stubbornness, after all the brokenness, after all the hurt, you finally open the door to go and actually heal. So, on your trip to Peru, I know that you told me you basically got on a plane, flew out there. You're out in the middle of a jungle. Why don't you tell us briefly about that experience that you went through whenever you got there?
Sure. So, again, I've never done any type of psychedelic in my entire life, but when I sat down with these shaman and they wanted to kind of find out what I was there for, what I was there to heal from, and I was authentic with them, there's a reason why I put Peru out a year and a half out, because I needed to heal me. I knew how broken I was after that dream that, wow, I have so much room I have to make up before I make this next step in my journey. And throughout that year and a half process, there was so much healing that took place. I'm now starting to do daily meditation, guided meditation, breath work, cold plunges, you name it. They're just allowing me to now claim ownership of my feelings, claim ownership of traumas that I've been through, and that I can still survive when I go deep into this darkness. And when I spoke with these shaman, I told them I was upfront and authentic. I told them that, listen, if you would ask me a year and a half ago, I would have told you I was here for the loss of my brother and how traumatic that was. But in this year's time, I've made so much progress that I typically was having 300 to 500 flashbacks a day. And I haven't had a flashback in probably 6 months. So I feel like I'm 95 to 100% healed from that. So I sit here as a humble student, just wanting to learn as much as I can. And that led me to my first ceremony of ayahuasca. And in that first ceremony, the only way I can describe it is it's out of this world, literally. You go into a different realm. And it took me to a place that was so terrifying. I remember when I Googled on my phone, like, what happens when you die? Nothing, the abyss. And the first experience I had was I was taken to the abyss. And here I am in this darkness of nothingness. And I can't even hear my own thoughts. I can't even hear my own speech. And all I'm thinking at this time, with a little bit of mental capacity that I had, was, oh my God, my worst nightmare just happened. I just overdosed in the jungle and died and left my family alone in the US. I'm like, what was the purpose of this? And when I realized I had no control over that moment and surrendered to that, that's when I was introduced to ayahuasca for the first time, Mother
Mm.
Ayahuasca. And she then lets me know that the purpose I brought you here is that you've asked what happens when you die. And I'm here to show you. And I'm like, this is it. She goes, the purpose why you're here is that man fixates so much on what happens when they die that they forget to live. And if you're willing to accept that, if you are willing to make a personal promise to yourself that when you go back to your normal life, that you will become present, not only in your life, but in your daughter's life, in your wife's life, Then I'll show you the next place. And I'm like, oh, anything. I can't wait to get back to them. Like I need to share this truth with them. She goes, okay, you ready? And I'll show you what heaven looks like. And she takes me up there and only lasts about 5 to 6 seconds. And when I tell you it's an unconditional love that has never been experienced in this realm, it's beautiful. And you're going to spend the rest of your life wanting to share that good news with everybody you come in contact with. When you recognize what the end looks like, it makes right now seem like there's so much I can do here. We're living in a world of pain when we could be living in an abundance of happiness, peace. The best thing happens when we die. So why are we so freaked out about financials and, relationships and this not going well, and that's not going well, and all these anxieties, concerns? It's pointless. It's pointless. The end is the end, and we're going to be in such amazing, unconditional love that you might as well make this life matter. And I took that knowledge back with me home, and it changed my life forever. Once I left the jungle, my life could never be the same.
Dude, that is so powerful. I mean, it's so impactful. It's such a cool story. And if we could probably have, which we might have to have another podcast, just to go deeper on the ayahuasca story, but I just think it's so beautiful, Ty, to look at your life and look at this moment growing up where you had this doubt and you had this fixation on what was the afterlife like. And you go through your entire life trying to control this narrative. And the secret, as you said when you started this story, is life is so simple. It's relinquishing control, surrendering control, and just allowing life to happen and live in the present and constantly be curious. And that cultivates this growth, that cultivates this peace. We get such in a rush to want to figure out what the end's like that we end up just forgetting to live. And that is beautiful. So, Ty, thank you for sharing your story on the podcast. I'm super impacted. There's a lot of deep moments on that. In summary on the show, if there was a book you were going to recommend to someone that has listened to this, what would that book be and why?
It's Green Lights by Matthew
Oh,
McConaughey.
so good.
It's an
No,
old question.
really.
You know, he shows you the methods in which when we view things in such a negative way that there's opportunity behind every one of those challenges in life. And when you can recognize that what we used to think was always a red light, you can't go any further, change the paradigm. And all of a sudden, green lights, move forward in life, go experience.
It is so good. And then second question, who's the person that's impacted your life the most and why?
As it had to be my wife, no question. That woman has saved my life multiple times, and she continues to be my rock. Even in the spiritual journey, there's so much uncertainty in it, but I've learned that uncertainty is a puddle that I love to play in now and not avoid. And she just continues to help build that confidence within myself, within this journey. And it's peeling back all the new layers that I never knew existed. And I'm now transitioning from old self to new self, which is also now creating a brand new relationship with my wife and with my daughter. So for her, I literally owe everything.
Beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. It's awesome. So, such a good episode. In closing, Ty, in 60 seconds, if someone's listening to this, they've had similar experiences, they're sitting in a dark place. If you had 60 seconds to tell someone, how do they come out of the darkness? What would you tell that person right now?
I would say that there's a lot of podcasts out there that can assist you, just like this. We typically, as adults, we think that we have our own story that we need to figure out. But there are so many unique stories that have come across this entire world, and we think we need to come up with the answers ourselves. Take the time to listen to somebody else's journey. And with that, there's so much knowledge and lessons that can help you through your journey. And that is literally my divine purpose moving forward, is to show others, no matter how dark your corner may feel, there is a much brighter light waiting for you to go and discover.
I love that, dude. Transparency breeds transparency is like my life's tagline. Like, whenever you start having transparent conversations with other people, transparency is bred and then healing is found. So, Ty Hamilton, thank you for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate it, dude. Have fun tonight. And until next time, this is Adam with Backpack Theory podcast. See you later.